I felt this internal rupture that happened on my right side. I had this moment of awareness of like, I think I just died. And I was ejected into this beautiful space. I call it the land of lights and colors, but it felt like bliss. And it was calm and peaceful. Think about every single color that's so beautiful, but amped up on steroids. And I was suspended in the light of the colors. And then I saw a Native American elder who was so close up. I could see every detail, every wrinkle in his face. He said, "You're here to be activated."
Still have questions after watching these videos? Perfect. Come hang out with me on Wake Up Wednesday at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern, where we will answer your questions live. And you never know what surprise guests might show up. Thank you for watching. My guest today is Kristen Von Foxx, who had a near death experience. So, Kristen, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, we're going to talk about a lot of things. We're going to start with your NDE, but you also do something super interesting called soul retrievals. And I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about this. So everybody's going to have to stay tuned if they want to hear about that part of it. But let's start where this all began, which was your near death experience. So I'm going to let you share it in any way that makes sense for you.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right. So my near-death experience started probably months and years before the near-death experience because there was a whole setup. I think for a lot of folks who have those near-death experiences, there's always a culmination of experiences that lead to that moment. And for me, it was a relationship that was so difficult. I think most of us have had one of those relationships in our life. I had manifested someone who was so much like my family. Even though I had done so much healing, I was estranged from my family, but these patterns kept showing up in my life. And clinically, I'm a trained psychotherapist. I became a shamanic practitioner after I found that the wounds that I had in my life were just not healing through the psychotherapeutic tools I had learned, which had me turn towards spiritual healing, looking at ancient indigenous healing modalities and learning what helps for those. And that's part of the deeper work that I do. But I was a very self-aware person. I had done layers of the psychotherapeutic work, therapy, the energetic healing, soul retrieval work on myself. But when we have a pattern that is so ingrained, it keeps showing up for us everywhere in our life until we heal it. And I was at one of those moments where I had married someone who was so different from my family. He was a different race, different color skin, completely different culture, yet he had the same birthday as my mother. His mother had almost the same birthday as my father. And if you could roll her personality to my dad and my sister into one, it was like I had married my family and was reenacting this. Even though I was so self aware, I thought I had healed these wounds, but this partner, blessed be, came into my life to mirror everything that I still needed to work on and that I needed to heal. But in that experience, I was finding that my inner child was being triggered, that I felt like I was going back to these moments of my childhood where I felt my big, scary dad coming in through the lens of his mother. She was very controlling in our relationship. She lived a couple blocks down from us and was very much a fixture in our relationship, almost like a third party interference. And as much as I love this person, there were so many patterns that this brought up that were just not okay and not healthy. And it was keeping us from having a deep connection. And we tried to work on it to some avail, but I kept getting these messages in my dreams where my guides kept handing me divorce papers and telling me that I needed to break this covenant to ask for an amicable divorce so that I could heal the layers of what I had brought into the relationship. And we did so much healing on his intergenerational lines. I felt like I had offered so much as a healer, but I didn't want to be a healer for my partner. I really wanted to enjoy that deeper partnership. And this relationship just brought everything up to the surface. I mean, the joke was that when we got married, we unearthed an ancestral curse for both sides. And it was after we went through this divorce, he said yes, it was still bittersweet. I remember packing up my bags and moving to a new area. It was in the midst of COVID. A lot of people had those karmic COVID relationships that broke up in the middle of COVID or got together during COVID for some heavy lessons. And it was during that time I didn't want to move back to New York City. We had just moved out of the city, upstate New York, to essentially create some healthy space between him and his mother so that we could see how our relationship could thrive without that interference. And it was then that I really began to unravel and look at all of these different patterns that were playing out that I had manifested in this relationship. And I remember being surrounded by moving boxes, crying in this new apartment, completely on my own with no family, no community around me in the middle of COVID, feeling completely isolated, just telling the universe that I can't do this again. I can't get involved in a relationship that mirrors to me that there are unhealed layers of self. I need to heal these layers before I can meet someone new. And I just remember sharing this deep prayer. And there was this message that came through that was, you need to really look into your ancestral lineage and see what is there. And I've known since I was a young child that I am 14 generations from Pocahontas. In fact, I was obsessed with this picture of this one Native American woman that hung in our hallway that I have since photocopied and is hanging out right behind me here. This is my ancestor who is 7 generations between me and Pocahontas. And if you're familiar with 7 generations theory, it's this idea that whatever work we do to heal ourselves heals not only 7 generations ahead of us, our children, but also 7 generations behind us, and how it is so pivotal for us to do that deeper healing work. And I got this message that you really need to look into your ancestry on a deeper level than what I had learned through the family trees and what I had learned when I was a child growing up in our home. And I got this book that was about Pocahontas's true life, which, if anyone knows her true story, it's not the Disney version. It's quite dark. There was a lot of traumatic experiences that she went through that I learned about from the oral sharings of her brother and sister who accompanied her to England, where she married my ancestor, John Rolfe, who is part of my lineage. I'm part white conqueror and part Native American. And then, a lot of much in between, as a lot of us are these days. But when I read her story, I saw patterns I was seeing in my relationship, patterns I saw in abusive experiences I experienced during childhood. And there were all of these parallels that were just sticking out to me. And as soon as I read this book, there was this giant voice that came out of nowhere and everywhere and inside of me at the same time. And it said, you need to break the curse and you need to go to your ancestral waterways. I needed to go on a pilgrimage to go to my ancestral lands. But my Native American ancestors, the Powhatan people, they were often hanging out on boats. They were moving along the waterways in the Chesapeake Bay area of Virginia, which is where part of my ancestry is from. And I had just met someone new at the time, and he was very adventurous. We had some kayaks. I love kayaking, a new favorite pastime in upstate New York. And I turned to him and said, hey, you want to go on an ancestral pilgrimage with me to kayak my ancestral waterways this upcoming season? And he was down. So we decided to take a trip and strap the kayaks up on the car. And we went camping for several days. And during that time, he was fishing, doing his own thing, and I was off on my own in the kayak on these quiet waterways, doing prayers and rattling and drumming and singing quietly, hoping no one would hear me, but pouring out these prayers from my heart. I didn't know exactly what I was supposed to be doing there, but I knew I was supposed to be there. And sometimes it's really when you just have that intention in your heart and you know that you're there to move some energy. And so I had cedar and I had tobacco, and I was offering prayers to the waterways and prayers to my ancestors, knowing I was there for a reason. And that part of the trip was wrapping up. There was only one more day before we were heading back. And there was this little glass shop. It was right on the bounds of Colonial Williamsburg, which is where I actually spent a lot of time growing up. And there was this sun catcher that I bought at a store where they were doing glass blowing in the colonial style. And it was a Pocahontas sun catcher. And I was being drawn to go to a specific river in the region. And it was important that I finished my prayers there. I didn't know why. It's just these are just internal feelings that I'm having. And I remember I got the sun catcher. It was blue. It was so pretty. I loved it. And then I was getting out of the car, about to get my kayak out so that we could go out onto the waterways. And this sun catcher fell and shattered. And I remember feeling really sad, but there was a message that came through. It said, no, you broke it. You broke it. Like I broke the curse. I broke the spell. I broke the cycle. And so I just felt it as a good omen. I'm very connected and I hear messages, not all the time, but when they come through, they come through. And so I just embrace this is all part of life. There's a message in this, and got into my kayak and we went on our way. Now, this is the first time that we were together on the waterway. Usually he was off fishing, doing his own thing. I was doing my own thing, but this time we were close by, which proved to be really important in this journey. So I remember we were off of this part of the river. There was a strong current, but we were off in a little nook right by these cliff faces. The waterway was almost as if there was a cliff that went from above us that went all the way down into the water. There was a little area where it was easier to fish and to be present without the boat being pulled into the current. So we were off in this little section. And I remember he was talking and going off about a story. And I had this awful sensation in my body that was so sudden. I felt this internal rupture that happened on my right side. And I grabbed my right ovary, right from the outside, of course, and felt this huge explosion. It felt like someone took a water balloon and threw it at me, but it exploded inside my body. It felt like there was a lot of gushing liquids inside. And that was the point where Sean, who was with me, his face, he said that my face went completely white and he started like making this really concerned look and stopped talking and said, "Are you okay?" And I remember gripping my side and saying something ruptured. I think I'm going to faint. And then I thought I said I'm going to faint, but I just fainted. That's his recollection. So the last thing I saw was the river, the blue of the kayak, and everything became this tunnel vision, but tunnel vision went sideways. And then I went into the water. That was the last thing I saw. And I remember having this moment where I felt so helpless because I had this moment of awareness of like, I think I just died or I'm about to die because I couldn't even breathe anymore. And I was just gone. Now, I think it's really fun to share that while I was on the other side, before I get there, that there was a series of miracles that happened on the home front, on the earth front. So my partner, he is in the military, he served in the military for many years. So he's really good at quick reactions and saving lives. And he said that I went pummeling right into the water and he jumped out of his boat and it was very deep where we were because he had fishing line and we were putting our paddles down. He likes to measure the depth and he didn't think twice. He just jumped out of his kayak and happened to land on one single foothold of that cliff face that I mentioned that had gone right underneath of us. There was a little area that he was able to put one foot out to pull me out of the water and into the boat, into the kayak. Meanwhile, his kayak goes floating down the river. But because he was fishing and his fishing line was out, it just happened to get caught on a fallen tree, that fishing wire. And so his phone, I think my phone was in there because he was taking pictures on it. All of that was safely just hovering a couple 100 feet down the river while I went to the other side. And my experience was I was ejected into this beautiful space. I call it the land of lights and colors for lack of a better phrase, but it felt like bliss and it was calm and peaceful, even though I had all this anxiety that I brought into this space. But it was almost like a sunset or a sunrise on steroids. Think about every single color that's so beautiful, but amped up on steroids. And I was suspended in the light of the colors, and the colors just sort of all emanated from this one spot that I was suspended in and floating within. And immediately I saw two ancestors, one feminine, one that was far away. And then I saw a Native American elder who was so close up. I could see every detail, every wrinkle in his face. He was just face to face with me, and he could sense my anxiety. And the first thing he said to me in this very calm, grounded, but excited voice was, "Don't worry, Kristen. You're not going to die today. You're here to be activated." And so he reached out and touched my solar plexus. And I remember my arms went up. And again, I was suspended in that light and color. And I just felt this bliss. My cells turned into this like orgasmic electricity. And I remember there was a moment of expansion and then a moment of contraction in response to that, where I grew up very Christian, fundamentalist Christian. And this idea that I'm here with this ancestor, this male ancestor who's now activating me. And the only way I can really communicate it is like a orgasmic, almost sexual experience, but non-sexual at the same time. I brought in this judgment and made it bad. And he saw that, and he looked at the thoughts that were around my head like a cloud that was clouding this experience. And he said, "That's not what this is. This is sacred." And so he sort of wafted away all of the anxiety, and I was able to let go of that. But it was almost like there was this moment of deprogramming that needed to happen, because I brought in my personality, my memories, this experience that I had just left, and my fundamentalist Christian background that was still activated somewhere in the back of my psyche. And he said that it was important for me to get this activation. And none of this was really through speech. There was this nonverbal knowing. And as I was getting this, it felt like the only words that come to me is this upgrade in my cells. There was this message that was really important that was imparted to me during this activation, where I just felt like everything became electricity in me, and it was moving through me and activating me. And I don't quite know what for. And I feel like there were some experiences and some wisdoms that were exchanged, but not all of it was allowed to come back with me. It was also a very short time there, and I wish I had spent more time there, but I wasn't allowed to stay. But the messages that were coming through in a nonverbal way were, you need to help people heal their ancestral lineages and heal where they're blocked and heal where their energy is gone, so that they can heal their relationships and experience joy and have that experience of living their best and most fulfilled lives without the interference of what we all are born with, right? We inherit trauma and attachment styles from our ancestors. All of that gets passed down through our DNA, all through nature and nurture of how we experience ourselves and our first primary caregivers, and how that shapes our relationships and creates those wounds. But he just brought me this message that you need to go back to help the people with this. And sort of remembering that broken Pocahontas sun catcher of breaking the cycle, it was almost like I came back to spirit, back to source, and back to the source of some of these patterns to be able to reset them. And he was telling me, you can't stay here. And it was then that I saw that this vision turned into a long hallway. And down the hallway to the left, there was a door. Although I couldn't see the door yet, I just knew it was here. And I heard this voice that was whispering from that doorway as I was walking down. It was a very dim light. It was not as bright as the place that I once was. It was almost like a passageway in between. And I just kept hearing, come back, come back, come back. And now, I'm a shamanic practitioner. I've worked with plant medicines around the world. The most I could equate this experience to was like a DMT journey, right? There's plant medicines, there's animal medicines that have those components. And I thought about a Bufu medicine ceremony I had done many, like a decade before. And I honestly thought that I was going to appear in that room where I was in that ceremony, coming down from this journey, this experience, because that's the closest thing I could equate to the oneness and the space that I visited on that side. But once I opened my eyes, I was in the blue kayak and I was completely soaking wet, and I saw the blue of the water, and it was my partner who was gently shaking me and saying, "Come back, come back, come back." And I remember that moment of opening my eyes, and the pain was so excruciating that I just closed my eyes and went back. And I saw that line of lights and colors, but it was further away this time. It was almost like I was trying to go back to the space, but then I kept being shaken, come back, come back. And every time I opened my eyes, the realm, the earth realm was pulling me back even stronger until I couldn't close my eyes and access that place anymore. And it was just so painful. It was hard for me to even keep my eyes open. I could barely move. I was in a horrible state. And it was then that my partner kept just ensuring and making sure I was back. On his side, he had been rubbing my sternum and was trying everything he could to make sure that I didn't pass. He said that for several minutes, I no longer had a heartbeat, and he thought that I was dead. But there was one moment where I stretched my arms out in the boat and he thought I was having a seizure, which corresponded with that touching of the solar plexus that radiated into that other alternate space that I was in. And after that, he slowly got me back to shore. I could not paddle. We, thank God, had a rope in one of the kayaks, because when we kayak with his son, he gets a little lazy and we'll hook the rope onto his kayak and pull him along. And thank God we had that, because that's what saved me to be able to pull me back onto shore. So I think I'll pause there if you have any questions.
Oh my gosh. Kristen, you have knocked my socks off because I feel like these NDEs are as unique as people are, and this one has components to it I've never heard before. First of all, I love synchronicities, and your Pocahontas thing really touched me because when I was in fifth grade, I got the lead role of Pocahontas in the school play, the nighttime one. And I have always had an affinity towards Pocahontas, as has my daughter. What a cool synchronicity that I get to interview somebody related to her, having had that experience myself. And I'm sure a lot of people, because it's a Disney movie, are relating to this as well. But what is so fascinating to me is that I did not know that you had a fundalist, fundal,
Fundamentalist Christian.
thank you. Really struggled with that one. Fundamentalist Christian upbringing. I want to come back to that in a second because it's interesting that sometimes people will have an experience that mirrors their belief system. And you did for just a second, but not in the way I thought you were going to have it when you mentioned it. So I think the first thing I really want to go to is the experience with your ancestor, the male ancestor of Native American descent. Have you been able to figure out the role of who that was?
I have, and you know what? I didn't put it together at the time. And then I think about a year later, I realized exactly who it was, and it became even more powerful. So when I learned about shamanism, and shamanism is the oldest spiritual practice that really predates any religion. And it goes back, really, many of our ancestors performed or were connected to some form of shamanism, right? Basically, it's an ancient way of seeing that there is energy in all things and a spirit in all things, right? There's a spirit to the stone, there's a spirit to the river, there's a spirit to your cat, to your dog, to your human friends. There's a spirit that connects all things. And shamanism gives us the tools to connect with the spirit of those things, to really glean the messages and the wisdoms that they have that really always create that connection right back to source, right? Great spirit, God. It's the same within all religions, I truly believe, but it's that energetic magnetizing source that is the creator of all things that is in all of us. We have that spark of creation, and to connect back to God is to connect to all things that lead to God or lead to the energy or source, or at least that's how I see it. And when I had first learned about shamanism, it was at a very low point in my life. Actually, it's always heartbreak that has cracked me open. I was married twice. The first marriage was to someone who had emptied my bank account and fled the country. And that was that heartbreak that really cracked me open because I had known him for 8 years. And we were pen pals long distance for most of it. We met in person in Colonial Williamsburg the first time. So I have a lot of these weird synchronicities that go back to that space, which is ironic, and also is ever ironic to go back to that origin of space where there was such a death and a rebirth in the same way. My family, we did colonial reenactments as part of our church, and we would go and study there quite some time. So we had one of those timeshares we couldn't get rid of, and every other year we were in the same place. So we did a lot of colonial research and reenactments in my young adulthood and early adulthood. And it was there that, sorry, I'm losing my train of thought here. It was from that relationship that really cracked me open, that showed me that we can lose parts of ourselves when we go through trauma, and it is so important to bring those pieces back. And I was on a quest to learn how to heal my soul on a spiritual level after that heartbreak, after that devastation, when the psychotherapeutic tools that I had learned as a therapist were just not cutting it when it came to the heartbreak and the devastation that I felt. And so I was on this quest, and I began to learn from spiritual healers, shamanic teachers. I had an apprenticeship at the New York City Open Center, and I was able to study nutrition, study with different Ayurvedic practitioners, Chinese medicine, and I started to learn about shamanism. And shamanism was really, I had books literally falling off the shelves in my walkway about soul retrieval and shamanism, which I'm sure we'll get into soon. But when I started to learn about shamanism and the ways to connect with the spirit of all these things, I started doing shamanic journey work. And these are in some of the workshops that I was able to participate in the big core of the work that I do with clients now, to teach them these tools to connect in with spirit, with source, with their intuition, with their higher self, to glean information. And it was through the shamanic journey that we connect in with trusted guides and ancestors. And my first real present spirit guide that came to me in my first shamanic journeys, who I relied on and continue to rely on, was always Chief. His name was Chief. And I could never fully see all of the details of Chief's face, but I could see his outline. I could see most of him, but he always referred to himself as Chief. So that was the only name that I was given. Now, Pocahontas's father was Chief Powhatan. And here I was in the Powhatan territory, having my near-death experience on the Mattapony River, where he used to boat, canoe, fish, and their community was. That's where my ancestors were, in that realm. And when I was integrating this, which has taken years to integrate, I think we always are integrating these experiences once we have them, I kept coming back to, oh my gosh, that's Chief Powhatan. That's Chief. I've been connecting with Chief for all this time. And I could feel the familiarity, but in the journey, I knew he was my ancestor. And it finally made sense. And in fact, I had multiple spiritual experiences around Pocahontas and around healing this lineage for weeks and months afterwards. But Chief was the only one that I could really reach. I couldn't even reach Pocahontas right away. It was really going through him and connecting with him. So once I put that together, about a year after the near-death experience, I realized this is who I've been connecting in this entire time, which brought me back to the origins of my practice and my roots that I had strayed away from a little bit once I was in that relationship that just knocked me over and into this spiral of unhealed wounds that I think sometimes when we go through those hard experiences, it can be a pit of despair that's hard to get out of when we're in it ourselves. And sometimes we need those experiences to knock on the door and get us out of our house, get us out of the funk, get us out of the space. And so for me, this near-death experience was a bringing me back to my path again, because I was on a very important path. I know, I've heard from you and your path. Once you know your path and your purpose, you are passionate about it, you stick to it. But sometimes life throws you wrenches, and they're always learning lessons that take you in a new direction to learn something pivotal that you needed for the journey. But it's important not to wander too far off the path after you found the gem. You got to bring it back to the path, to bring it to the people, and bring it to that legacy that you're creating, and continue that on. So it was really impactful to realize after a year that this is who I had been connecting with, and I hadn't connected the dots until after that experience.
Wow, that's incredible. So was he communicating with you where he was using a voice? Was it telepathic?
It was
How did the
yeah.
communication? So if it was telepathic, was it, "Hi Kristen, how are you doing?" Or was it packets of information that were being communicated all at once?
It was as if he could read my thoughts because those first thoughts that I came in with were panic. And so he just went right to it and, just assured me in that moment, like, don't worry, you're not going to die today, because that was my, I just died or I'm dying. Something just happened. And he just cut to the chase, and he was so calm. He could sense all of my anxiety. So he just centered me in that moment and said, you're not going to die today. You're here for a reason. You're here to be activated. And so from there, it was a series of just knowing. Same thing for when I had those thoughts that I didn't communicate out loud about judging that experience, making this preconception of what I had learned about Christianity and being sexual or sexual energy. The Christians, we kind of keep it into marriage, into this space. And here I was having these like very of amazing experiences that I could only akin to a sexual experience of the highest degree. And so he read those thoughts. He was like, get rid of that. That's not what this is. Like, we're not doing that. This is not incestuous. Please let me assure you, Kristen. This is more of an energetic attunement, if anything.
So all of this was happening within the color realm.
Yeah, the only space that I was really in, I remember being in the realm of lights and colors, and he was sort of, there was clouds around him, but not behind me, but I could see them behind him. And then I could see a feminine figure who I knew was Pocahontas, but she was further away and she was not ready to speak. That was not part of our journey at that time. I've since connected with her, and she's been more accessible through my journeys and my meditations. But first, it was about connecting in with this other part of my ancestry, for he was the one that held the wisdom that needed to impart to me. Also, as long as I've known, the connection that I've had most deeply to my guide has been to Chief, right? So he came, and it was just amazing to me that I realized after all this time that, oh, this is an ancestor. I didn't realize that Chief was, but Chief Powhatan, that's what they called him. They didn't call him by another name. He didn't have a first name,
Wow.
not that I know
So
of, not that was
so
written about.
now he's activating you. Tell us in the best way you can with the limited human words you have, what in the world is an activation in this heavenly realm?
It was like electricity was moving into every single cell. And it was almost like if you had an electrical cord, or you were able to sort of, bring a zap in. It was the zap that needed to go specifically into my solar plexus to, I didn't get these words then, but I'm getting the word now, recharge my spirit. Almost as if I'm sort of, I see and I speak in vision when I see it, and my guides are coming in now, sort of describe it for us. And in other words, since I feel like I've used the words already that I had, they're showing me this vision of when you are having that moment at a hospital and your heart has stopped beating, and you need to, I don't know what they're called, but they clank them together, they zap you, and they place them on your chest to give you that activation, to sort of shock you back to life. My guides are sort of coming in and saying it was needing to bring me back to life, but not this life that we have here, but the spiritual life, the mission life. I truly believe that every soul comes here to incarnate, to learn lessons, and to have a purpose. And that if we don't live that purpose, we become depressed. We don't fully live out what we're here to do and who we're here to become. And as a result, I do believe that it ripples out and it affects others who need the activations, whether it's a message or an insight or a wisdom or a tool that we're here to impart to others. That person needs that activation for themselves to be activated on their path. And we all come to hold each other energetically, to give each other tidbits and breadcrumbs along the trail, to create those synchronicities that lead to someone awakening in their path. Right? We're not all on an island. We do need spirit. We do see the reflection through relationships and people around us, even if that's a podcast that you just turned on to and you heard the one sentence that you needed to hear. Or I love walking in a crowd of people and you just catch a little phrase in someone else's conversation, and it was the exact advice you needed, or something that makes you laugh, that brings you to some wisdom that you needed to be reminded of. And so it felt like I was being reactivated to come back to my path. In fact, I didn't want to leave there. It was so nice. It was like, wow, this place feels amazing. And the endless amount of love, just the love and the acceptance is unlike anything I've ever experienced. And I mean, I'm part of spiritual communities where we tap into a little bit about that love when we're in those plant medicine experiences, when we're deep in meditation, or we feel the connection of angels, or people who feel connected to the Christ consciousness, right? We can feel that love in little drops, because that's all that we can really hold the space for. Within that realm, it was just this infinite love that was then moving like this electrical shock that was reinvigorating my system to bring me back to life so I could wake up from this dismal space that I had been stuck in, you know, sort of in my own wounded space, licking my own wounds and staying triggered. And it was this message of like, come back. We need you to be on the mission. And here's a refinement to the lens of your mission. Because truly, I've been doing this healing work for so long and through the lens of soul retrieval and helping people reclaim their power and their passion. But I hadn't ever looked at it through the lens of the ancestral piece and how much we can really inherit patterns that aren't even ours. We don't even know where they came from. And we're in this unique time in the world where we have more tools, more accessibility to information than we ever have before. Therapy is an amazing thing that most people, I also work in the dating and coaching realm. I've worked for a matchmaking agency for a number of years alongside my healing practice. And that's one of the green flags for everybody. If you've been in therapy, or if you're in therapy, that levels you up and gives you extra tools and extra points for a lot of folks who want someone who's self-aware. And I think that we're in this moment in time where we have the tools and it is acceptable and praised to be in therapy. And our ancestors didn't have that. There was stigma, there was silence, there was a limitation to divorce. So whether relationships were happier in our grandparents' age or they were forced to be together because there was financial dependency and feelings of ownership, that and those patterns have been passed down, and we inherit so many of them that didn't have the space or the tools to be resolved. So I truly believe that many of us are here with a really full plate of food we didn't pick up at the buffet, what our ancestors did and what's sitting on our plate until we can digest it and fully release that and move it through us. And so the activation that I got was about needing to heal those legacy wounds through my family, to really look at the roots and what I was carrying, but also this extra fuel to help people where they're unconsciously sabotaged and stuck in patterns that aren't even theirs, that they don't even know how to get rid of if they didn't even know where they started.
Wow. So you mentioned the solar plexus a couple of times. So not everybody's familiar with the chakra system, but what was the role specifically for you of the solar plexus, and why do you think that was the area instead of like your heart chakra or your throat chakra? Why do you think that that was targeted?
The solar plexus, for anyone who doesn't know, it's that space between the breastbone, like right around here. And this is the space where we hold our power, or we sort of bend over and protect ourselves and can be meek and not as outgoing or have those leadership qualities. And so the solar plexus is about leadership. It is about finding our place in the world and moving through it with confidence. But a lot of us have our confidence shook during traumatic experiences. And I know that in my personal life, there was a lot of complicated grief and layers of heartache in that, but there was a deeper hurt in the sense of my power, and the triggers that were coming up in my relationship were so many reflections of where I had been disempowered as a child, where I felt like I was belittled, where I didn't have a space in this world, where I couldn't stand up to be who I was, and I shrank quite a bit. And I could feel myself shrinking again through the triggering in that relationship. And I could see the differentiation between this is my partner who is showing me mirrors of those relationships that I still need to heal within, my family dynamic. And this isn't that person, but they're here to teach me that. But I was feeling that getting small, shrinking, feeling sorry for myself, that staying in the pit of despair, the lick my own wounds for too long. And it was really the solar plexus that was like, honestly, like, get out of your own shit, Kristen. Zap, we got to pull you out of this to bring you energy where you have just become so internalized. And I felt very, very spiritually weak at that moment. I had felt like, here's the thing. My guides were very adamant about me marrying that partner. In fact, I was the one that proposed. We'd already talked about marriage, but I proposed to him, put a little, do you want to get married at Burning Man in a fortune cookie, and slipped it to him at the restaurant. He thought it was the restaurant's fortune cookie. It was really sweet. But my guides were like, you need to marry this person. And I had felt so sad because I had listened to that guidance. And here I was in this relationship that then broke me into pieces to break me down to where there were foundational cracks in my foundation of relationships based on the wounds that I had sustained from childhood. So at first, I didn't understand that this was not to punish me, but this was to show me where I needed to become stronger, where I needed to heal more layers, because I had done so much other healing work in my life and I had been so successful in so many other areas. But this was a layer that still needed healing. And it broke my confidence because I had listened to that wisdom. I had listened to my intuition, and it didn't get me to the place I wanted to be. In fact, it made me feel like I was a failure, and I got stuck in that space when really this was a gift of being able to heal this. And I have to say that for anyone who hears their intuition, that guides them somewhere, that brought them somewhere that they didn't expect, or maybe it didn't pan out the way that you wanted to, I just want to remind you that through this reflection of this experience and many others, and with my clients as well, we are always brought to exactly where we need to be, because there's a transformative lesson that if we didn't transform through it, we wouldn't become who we're meant to be. And so again, it's not a straight path to the destination our souls want to go. We need those winding realms, almost like you go to the top of a mountain. It's never a straight line up. It's usually winding around the path, winding around the river, winding around the mountain until you get to the top, because there's so much that you need to experience along the way and along the journey that really enrich you, so that you get to the top, you really have something to share. And I think that the solar plexus was needed because I was having a pity party and was feeling weak and feeling defeated for those decisions that actually led me to, honestly, the greatest love I've ever experienced and new levels of peace and success in my life in other ways. But I had to be brought through that relationship so that everything I needed to still heal could be triggered and brought to the surface so that I could heal it. And it was beyond what was mine. It was truly patterns and layers that, I mean, if I look back at my ancestry, some of the horrible things that happened to Pocahontas, I see remnants of them happening to me, sexual abuse, um, all sorts of traumatic things. And it's my true belief that Pocahontas was sex trafficked to some degree when she went to Europe, because of the accountants of how she was handled and handed along to multiple men. So part of me always wonders, am I a Red Rolf, meaning John Rolfe's ancestors, children, or am I related to these other men that he would just send her off to these other guys' castles for weeks and months at a time? Well, what do you think was happening there? Like, what do you think is happening these days when women are abducted, especially Indigenous women, and are sent off to be essentially abused? And so I saw those patterns playing out in my childhood, saw it with my sister, saw it with my father, saw it with some of our ancestors on that side of the lineage. And that's what shook me so much when I heard her account. I realized this pattern goes deep. This is not just about me and my life, but this is about, I'm here to heal something beyond what I have come to work through. But this is ancestral, and this is for the betterment of my ancestors ahead of me and my ancestors behind.
Wow. All right. I'm going to tie two things together because this is so fascinating. In your near death experience, you're with Chief and you have these thoughts. And you said that he saw them above your head and he whisked them away. And just now, you talked about how we are reminding ourselves that sometimes we have these experiences because we have to go through them to heal different things. So there's two lines of thought, which is why I'm trying to marry these together. There's a line of thought that everything you do, every thought you have creates the reality around you. So if you were to believe that, you would think that your thoughts brought all of that stuff with these relationship issues to you. However, the other thought, or the other, I don't want to say thought because the thought kind of, it's redundant of the other idea. The other mechanism, the other lens we could look through, other than thought, is that it is part of what you came here to ultimately do, an experience you designed for yourself to have. And the reason I like to marry these two together is because there's some crossover. There's a little bit of crossover, but at the same time, I think there are people maybe as they're waking up that beat themselves up because if they hear that everything's about your thoughts created your reality, then it doesn't leave room for some experiences that you wanted to have that you would perceive as negative. So I'm loving this conversation because it's putting a lens on both parts of it. They can both be true, but neither also can be true. So I'd love for you to speak to that because you have this unique background of being a psychotherapist and a shaman with all these other medicine, mind expanding, plus your near death experience. And then these two things that kind of exist simultaneously, but one cannot also cancel out the other, where people can be in a place where they're not blaming themselves. So, do you understand where I'm going with this?
Yeah, I think that we're all our own biggest, worst critic, and we have to see it as it's not just this one moment in time or that experience that you've experienced that you're still stuck on, right? We have this whole pan of our lifespan that also is incorporated into multiple lifetimes that we've experienced. And I truly believe that we are sent to this earth because this is the learning realm. This is the densest planet where the lessons can feel really heavy, but we have this tangible experience that we manifest, not just with our thoughts, but sometimes, I mean, I'm thinking about this is like, are these even my thoughts? Did I create being abused as a child? I don't think anyone like has their thoughts and create that. Sometimes things are happening to us, but they're also happening for us and through us. So I look back at those experiences that are actually the reason I became a psychotherapist because of the extreme trauma and experiences that I had as a child. I wanted to help people, and that was part of my journey. And so I think that it's a combination of both. I think it's important to know that our thoughts do create our reality, but there are also moments on our timeline that have been predestined and prearranged that we cannot change in the moment. And I've listened to so many near-death experiences, and I can't say this is true for mine, besides being on this end of it, but and I don't want to say I'm jealous of the people who have those near death experiences where they get the life review. I'm like, where was my life review? But I know that's not what I was meant to have. But they have moments where folks who have had those near death experiences look back at their life and see the trajectory and plan certain events to happen, certain traumatic experiences, a car accident, a near death experience as a pivotal moment to make sure that they're still on track. It makes me think of a wonderful practitioner, a friend and a colleague of mine who is a traditional Chinese medicine practitioner. And there's multiple times in his life where he was unable to walk. And the second time after he had healed himself, he was in a car accident in Nepal. And when he got into the car accident, he was told he would never walk again. And he was basically grounded there, and they brought him acupuncture needles in a kit, taught him how to put them into his own knees. And while he was living out there with no help, there was a traveling practitioner that would come and bring him the needles and show him how to clean them, and then he would start practicing on himself. And because of this, he learned how to do acupuncture, went to acupuncture school, and is a living epiphany of someone who's had that breakthrough, an epitome of someone who was able to come back. And he had moments of that when he was younger, and he used Tai Chi when he was younger to be able to learn to move and to walk again, and to have these moments where he started to get off the path, to then remind him he needs to come back and fulfill this mission. And sometimes that looks like a horrible accident or a loss of someone that you love or a tragic experience, because we have to come back to the lesson that we were meant to. And sometimes it's through transforming it through an experience. I've also heard lots of people with near-death experiences because I'm a junkie for it now, and I love to listen to other people's visions and what they experience, that we come back because we're both characters, right? We can be someone that takes advantage of other people and harms them in one lifetime. And then we have a lifetime of suffering to recant and to experience the karmic edge and version to counteract those experiences, because we come here to learn, and we can't be hard on ourselves, because every moment that you go through is an opportunity to activate yourself, to spiritually grow. If we were given everything that we needed and we had all the wisdom and knowledge, then we wouldn't be here on earth, would we, to learn these lessons? We really come here to learn and to grow and to ascend and to integrate the experiences that we can only learn here. And I've had a couple of those moments in my life where I was like, oh, I followed my intuition. And sometimes it's like right on target. There's something amazing that happened because I listened to it, or I felt like I have to go on this road, and then I find out that like the other bridge had collapsed or something horrible had happened on the other road, that the trees were down. And so it's those little synchronicities and enough ones that show me that something really good happened because I listened to it and it was 100% correct. Then we have those moments where we listen to our intuition. We find ourselves in a position where we're like, why am I here? This really is horrible. Why is this happening to me? We question our existence. We question God. We question all of it. But those are the moments when we can become closest to God, closest to source, when we are broken, when we're broken in to have that breakthrough. And that's when there's a lesson that maybe was disguised as something a little bit different than what we anticipated, what we wanted to experience as a final outcome, because it was a moment of growth. And I'm reminded that we're all failures until we keep trying and getting back up on the horse to become a success. And I think sometimes we get stuck in where we feel like we're failing, or where we feel like we're not good enough, or we're hard on ourselves for not being exactly where we want to be, or we compare ourselves to others and their spiritual journey, which is not good. It's not what we want to do. Everyone has a unique experience that they have cultivated on a timeline for themselves. And so I think that that gives us the opportunity to see everything through the lens that it is sacred, that everything is a teacher. Losing your job, your car breaking down, maybe the stranger that came out of nowhere to help you fix it, right? There's so many ways that we can have breakthroughs. And if we don't label something good or bad, but we create the room to see that there's a miracle that's happening, and maybe we don't see the end result yet, but it's come to happen for a reason. Especially on our spiritual journeys are journeys of deep faith and commitment to the path of the unseen before we see the results. And that's when people, through the law of attraction, have the most success, is when you believe it to be true, even though you don't see all of the evidence of it being yet. This is when you commit to the path and say, okay, this breakup was horrible. I hate how this made me feel, but it led me to a really beautiful divine relationship. And I have to spill the beans here. So the man who saved my life is the man I've been with for almost 6 years now. And we have a very beautiful, healthy, happy relationship. And that was the very beginning of our friendship and the cultivation of our relationship. And if I hadn't gone through that loss, that near death experience, that space to be so vulnerable, to have someone step in, literally save my life and help take care of me. Now, I've helped take care of him in other ways, and we do that for one another as we find partnership, and partnership is really about that give and take and that balance. But it's important to know that when we are committed to the path, that sometimes we have to go deep into those valleys before we get to the peak, to see why we went through the valleys and why it needed to bring us to that exact moment that feels like the peak or the success, or that moment where we can be like, oh, this journey makes sense now. And so, my reminder to everyone is to be easy on yourself during the journey. The journey can be rough. And it's in those moments that we have to have the most faith.
Wow. I love that you not only answered my question, but after you talked about how much we need to forgive ourselves for experiences that we plan to help us learn our lessons, that you still brought it back to the thoughts and the manifestation. So there's so much interwovenness that we're all trying to understand. So I always say to people, take in what resonates, leave behind what doesn't, because I don't think there is a black and white or anybody who knows everything. There are just more questions that get uncovered the more experiences you have.
Exactly.
So, in order to ask my last question about your near-death experience, and we're going to go back into what I promised people we would talk about soul retrieval and some of these other areas. I need to understand the timeline a little bit better. So, you grow up fundamentalist Christian, you get a degree, and you become a trained psychotherapist. You find the shamanic practitioner path and the soul retrieval. You have the near death experience. So, when you went into the near death experience, how deeply were you still into the religious aspect? Because you had already peeked behind the curtain with the shamanic practices and medicine journeys, correct?
Yeah, so for the timeline, I grew up fundamentalist Christian. That was a very big part of my life, but my parents took it to a degree that was quite toxic, and I saw things that I would consider abusive play out in my family that were sort of stamped with Christianity and like men have control and this is what we do. And that really turned me off, and I sort of shut down for survival to get through it. But once I got married to my first ex-husband, I was sort of on this space of not sort of believing all of that in the same way. And it actually have come back to even being even more having a deeper faith in Christianity and a very close connection with Jesus. Um, Jesus is a healer. He was a shaman, and it's been such a delight to be able to connect with him through the shamanic lens, where I feel like I have a deeper, more profound, and authentic relationship with his spirit, because he is a teacher. And right through shamanism, through journeying, through meditation, you're able to connect in with different guides, and Jesus is one of those. And so it was interesting. I had one of my teachers that she went to do a soul retrieval for me, and she wasn't able to do one. In fact, I've been the person that's been able to do most of my soul retrievals. I've had a couple helpers here and there, but a lot of my path is learning how to do this for myself. And so that's part of the tools that I teach my clients. And then, of course, I help them heal where there's blocks in their blind spots, of course, because we all have them. But I remember one of those healings I went to for one of my mentors, and she said, I wasn't able to bring you a soul part back, but I brought back Jesus. And she said, the Jesus that you learned about when you were growing up was this manufactured sense of Jesus that was very black and white and not loving and inclusive. And the Jesus that wants to come to you is the authentic version that wants to actually truly have a relationship with you that goes beyond the judgment and, the legalism in the church that I had experienced so much that had turned me off, right? There's a there are people of every creed, right, who will have the light manifestation of and the beautiful expression of love, where you'll have people that will take it too far and they will spread hate. And that's in any religion, that's in any culture. We have people that take it to all extremes. And it was through the shamanic work that I was able to connect in more deeply with my connection in spirit with Jesus. And that has been a very beautiful healing force within my life. And that's part of one of the guides that I bring in to do some of my healing work. So as far as the shamanic journey went, my family and I began to disconnect. They actually kicked me out of the family for practicing shamanism because they don't really know what it is and they don't really create space to listen. So they were just like, oh, it's devil worship, which it is 100% not. There is that in the world, and I am not part of that by any means. I'd like to think that I'm the complete opposite side of the spectrum and on the good side, within these spiritual battles that play out in this realm. But it was through my connection to shamanism that my parents got really upset. They always wanted me to be a Christian psychotherapist, and there was already a falling out because I was training in a secular college that was not a Christian university. And so there was already some being on the rocks there because they were quite extreme in their beliefs. And shamanism came so easily because it's part of my lineage, right? It goes back to my shamanic Powhatan lineage, is that we would have connected with the spirit of all things. The origin of journey is that we would divine food sources. And so the shaman, the seer in the community would be looking to see where the food would the spirit of the food, the buffalo would say, hey, I'm here to feed your people. I'm hanging out on this side of the ridge, this many miles south, right? And we would follow those wisdoms and then find that animal and then take its life because it had surrendered itself on a spiritual level and said, I'm the one that is coming to feed your people. It was a very beautifully aligned and integrated way in which humans used to coexist with the spirit of all things that we've sort of lost touch with. But it was through going through my own trauma and realizing that I had all these tools, but they really weren't fixing the problem on the felt level. So when I had my first traumatic experiences as an adult, when I went through that heartbreak with my ex-husband who emptied my bank account and fled the country, it was then that I felt like I had all this joy and all this vital energy that was gone in an instant. I felt like I was an empty shell of who I used to be. And I felt like I needed to get that part of myself back. Like I knew who I was and I was no longer that. And it's the same thing for someone who goes through a trauma, whether it's a hard breakup where you feel like your heart's broken and shattered and you just can't love the same way, or someone betrays your trust. And all of a sudden there's this, vindictive part of your personality or a darker shade of seeing love through a different tinted glasses where you are just not open to love in the same way or open to trust. You have that little angel or devil on your shoulder telling you like, don't trust, close your heart, this person's gonna hurt you in this way, right? We have those moments where we shut down because something difficult happened. And soul loss is this idea that we go through life and life is hard sometimes, and when we go through those moments, part of our soul can dissociate. It leaves our body to protect ourselves as a self-defense mechanism in the moment. And in psychology, there's no term or way to get that spark back, but we build up the rest of that person's healthy ego so that they can cope, so that they can build up the rest of who they are and go on to live that life. But in ancient shamanic cultures, we would go back to find that spark of light, that essence, that energy, that person's personality, those gifts that left, and we would bring them back in a ceremony to reunite them with their power. And now people go days, weeks, years, lifetimes, generations without calling back that vital spark that could help them trust in relationships, be open to love, whatever that trauma is, right? I've had clients who moved around a lot as a kid, and there was a part of them that could never really settle down and feel safe because they were guarding their heart in all of their relationships, guarding themselves when it came to friendships because they were afraid that that love, that community was going to be taken away in an instant if they moved again, right? You see this a lot with army brats, families that are traveling a lot in the army, or just a job placements for someone's father when they're growing up, they need to keep moving. You see this with attachment wounds when someone has a parent that's not able to be fully present or is even, maybe harmful in some experience. Maybe they're an alcoholic, they're being abusive, and that part of you that would open up to love and trust is now terrified because the person who is supposed to show you love and show you safety is now harming you. And then this person becomes very closed off, very protective, or plays out those patterns themselves and can become like the abuser and pick up the addiction. And so in psychology, we just help that person heal from there with the mind. But when we work with shamanism, we bring back the soul, that spark that animates all life. And when you have that part of your spark come back, it changes the game on who you are, how you feel, and what you attract. So for example, I had been abused when I was a child. I've alluded to this a couple different times. I had been harmed by a neighbor, and it manifested in my adulthood as well. I was harmed by another neighbor as an adult. And I remember this is when I was doing my studies with soul retrieval. I had just done my training, and there was a colleague of mine, and we were doing trades and work on each other. And I remember it was right after that training, and she came and we were working together, and she brought back this part of me that had left because of that awful assault. And I remember it was like the moment that that assault happened again as an adult, I was pushing this person away and saying no. I was screaming no, but it came out as a whisper. It was like all of the energy that I would have had to fight was just like gone. I had no access to it. And so when I had this soul retrieval for this part of me, I remember I just felt really strong and bold, and this fire was in me, this like, don't mess with me energy. I remember having a confrontation with that person and chatting with them, and they could feel my energy. They were terrified to talk to me. And I was able to stand up for myself and set boundaries and cut them out of my life, but not without giving them 2 cents about how I felt about it and how it was wrong. And I remember it was like this fire that I didn't have access to is now back. And now I'm not targeted for any of those experiences anymore. My whole childhood was filled with that. But once that part of my energy was back, those that would abuse me can feel it. I'm not someone to mess with because they're looking for someone who's already been harmed in that way. I've seen people who they walk a certain way with a lack of confidence on the street, and those are the people that are pickpocketed the most because it's all about body language, it's all about energy. And if you've lost that part of your energy, you can continue to fall into these patterns where other people continue to play out these storylines with you to take advantage because they see that part of your power is missing. And that was the same thing that happened with my first soul retrievals. It was like once that power came back, not only did I feel like fun and vibrant and that energy was back, that I had felt that spark just leave me completely from that heartbreak, but even the sparks of life from earlier on before I could even think about how I had changed as a child. So many different little fragments that had been chipped off over the course of my childhood all were coming back and reweaving this new story and tapestry of my life and who I would attract based on healing those wounds. And that's a lot of the work that I do with my clients now. They're stuck in relationship patterns that aren't what they want because there's some level of soul loss or some trauma that happened to them early on in childhood or even in adult relationships where that affects their heart so deeply that they start to attract those patterns. I think about a client that I had, and she came to me after she had been through a series of abusive relationships. And she told me that she had a really good relationship in high school and college. And the day that she thought he was going to propose to her was the day he broke up with her. And it shattered her heart. It was the healthiest, happiest relationship that she had. But after that, she just was manifesting these really abusive, toxic men that were really taking advantage of her in many different ways and harming her. And then she couldn't get out of that cycle. And we found that the part of her that was attracting those patterns was the part of her that was self-abandoning and felt like she was unworthy of love because she had that heartbreak. And the way that it affected her was so deeply that it affected her value. And then she was attracting these men that weren't valuing her and could see that she didn't value herself enough to set the boundary to stop those patterns of behavior. So we attract based on what's in our energy. And if we are coming into life with patterns that are not even ours, and then we have these experiences young or even in past lifetimes or early childhood or even our adult relationships that fragment parts of our energy, we start to create this fragmented reality that's not exactly what we want until we start to heal the parts inside of ourselves so that we can attract the fullness of the experience that we want when we are full and whole to be able to even accept that when it comes into our life. So that's a little bit about the soul retrieval work, and I'm happy to answer any other questions if you had any. I kind of just went into that because it felt like a natural segue, but I'm happy to answer if there's any clarity needed there.
Well, the reason I was asking about the timeline was because I wanted to know what was different before, like what you believed before and what you believed after, but you actually answered it. And my other question I was going to ask you was about spiritual matchmaking, but you went into this whole explanation about how we attract things and why. And it just, you answered both of my questions that I had about it. That's how spirit works, though, right?
Yeah, and I've worked in the matchmaking industry in the realm of not being able to support people with a spiritual coaching. And it was so hard to do because I could see clients who would come into me and everyone that they were, I could deliver them the perfect person on paper that was exactly what they were looking for. And even if she said yes to them, they would say no to her. And the whole reason that they said no was because they could feel how closed her energy was. This was someone who had gone through a lot of trauma in childhood, had a very tumultuous relationship with their father that really shaped their attachment style. And then they also worked in the corporate world that was a male dominated area of work. And she had created so much armor around her to stay safe and to survive that was just picked up on energetically immediately. And she was beautiful and she had so much to offer and she was incredibly successful. But when someone has an energetic wound, other people can feel that, whether it's conscious or unconscious. And again, we either repeat the patterns or we heal them to replace those patterns with something that's more aligned with what we want. And so that's why I always say that You can invest so much money in matchmaking, but it's most important to invest money in yourself first and invest the time and the energy to really heal, to make sure that any of those childhood wounds, those attachment wounds, those ghosts of the ex-boyfriends and girlfriends past can be healed from you, so that you're not bringing that into the dating scene to sabotage the relationships that are what you want, or to recreate them in the same way.
Um, I'm curious because you've mentioned this a couple of times. So you're talking about uncovering places in somebody's energy that's stuck. Do you see energy in people when you're working with them? Is this something that's developed after your near-death experience, or is this more like from your background and your training with psychotherapy?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I've always had these gifts. In fact, it's a blessing and a curse at times. And now I've turned it to, it used to be going to parties and then seeing like a little demon on someone's shoulder. And now it's turned into, I really turn that off as much as needed, unless it's there to keep me safe in a space. Because I can pick up on energies and entities and things like that. That's part of the work that I do. I don't advertise that much, but when we have these heartbreaks, these soul losses, that creates a void space for those energies to latch right into. And so part of the healing those patterns is to pull out what and tease out what's not yours and what doesn't need to be there and needs to be released, and to bring back that person's power. But I've had the gift to be able to see into people's energy, but a biggest one of my tools is to use the shamanic tools that I use in my practice, where I go into an altered state of consciousness using the drums and rattles to go see more deeply into people's energy field. When I have their permission, we're coming into a container to do that together. So I don't just read people's energy on the streets. That's not quite it, but I can have conversations with people and see visions and things like that. For example, I was chatting with a business partner of mine and I saw a vision of her on TV, and I was sort of sharing that with her. And I've had a couple visions for clients in the past as we've been working and healing these wounds. Multiple times I've seen people, you need to go to this country to visit, and you need to go to this area and then spend time at this pub, and you're going to meet your person there. And lo and behold, I was on a retreat and I was working with one of my clients, and she was a referral from that client. She said, "Have you talked to her in the last couple of years?" And I said, "No, I haven't heard from her for a while." She said, "Well, you told her she needed to go to Ireland. She needed to spend time at this one area and she was going to meet a person." Well, she met her person there, exactly as you said. And now they've been married for 7 years and they just had their kid. She never told you that she found them like that. I've had a couple clients reach out to me over the last year and a half, 2 years, who have said that when I said they're going to meet their person here in this place, and they did, and now they're married to that person, and I've even met and worked with some of their partners. So I see the visions and I get that information when I'm working with someone. And when we start clearing the patterns that would sabotage that, then it's almost like a fog starts to clear and we can sort of see the end goal. And it's not for everybody. I don't get that wisdom and that clarity for every single person, but the people who have received the guidance and followed it, I've heard really incredible stories. Like I had one client who I kept seeing she needed to move to Hawaii. She needed to be at the ocean. That's where her business was going to take off. And it was really incredibly important. And so she went to go visit Hawaii and she ended up moving there, and her business became $1 million business. And it all sort of happened from this space. So sometimes I wish I could see so deeply for myself, but we are able to see for others sometimes more clearly than we're able to see for ourselves. So I'm one of those big proponents of have healers on your team, especially if you're a healer. It's good to work with someone. I have my team of trusted advisors and in human form and spirit form that are helpful to me, because sometimes we just can't see in our blind spots. And that's sort of my expertise, is to see what's out of reach of what you're not seeing and come and bring the part of your energy back that left from that place of that blind spot.
Wow, beautiful. Well, Kristen, I would imagine that there are a lot of people who are wondering how they can connect with you, where they can find you, and what you have to offer. So, will you share all that information with us, please?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm on Facebook. I'm pretty active there as Kristen Von Foxx. You can find me there. It's Kristen and Fox with Foxx. I'm also on Instagram at the Shamanatrix. And those are some great ways to connect with me. I do a lot of free workshops. I do a 3-day challenge to attune your love frequency, to really look at what might be in your energetic frequency that could be throwing partners off, that could be simultaneously or unconsciously repulsing the types of love that you want instead of the type that you want to attract. And so it's really about cleaning up your energy, figuring out what's in your energetic field that might be sabotaging those relationships or calling in the wrong ones. I also do one-on-one work. My website is theshamanatrix.com, and that's where I help my people. I have a lot of tools and free gifts, some quizzes, some meditations to really help my people connect in more deeply with themselves and understand their relationship patterns. And of course, I have those free resources there on the website and in the workshops that I run pretty regularly.
I'm so curious. There's not very many people that I talk to that give away workshops for free. What compelled you to do that?
I think that we are in a crisis right now when it comes to love. And I have a lot of Venus in my chart. I'm a double Libra, sun and moon. I'm all about love. And relationships have been the biggest teachers in my life. And I've seen so many clients, I've seen so many people in my world who get stuck in these patterns that they're not able to break. And I know that everyone is here to manifest a beautiful experience in divine love. But if we have those wounds that are still showing up in our energy field, then we can't quite make it to where we want to go. We can't quite break those cycles. And so the tools that I have are really to help people create awareness about what is going on in your energetic field, because I know a lot of people are stuck and it's not what they think it is. They think it's, they just need to change their style, or they need to be more visible on separate apps, or they need to, join a running club. Right? There's so many different ways that we can try to fix the issue. But if we're not fixing it on an energetic level, then we're not healing those wounds that are sabotaging it. And if we don't know where to look and what those wounds could be, then we're really stuck in the dark. So my goal is to really educate and inspire as many people as possible, and to help bring them back to the ancient ways that have affected me and healed me so greatly, because I am my biggest lab rat here, right? To find soul retrieval and these healing modalities have completely shifted and shaped my life. And so I'm here to give back, to help other people learn more about what's been showing up in their energy and how to heal that, so that they can too be successful in love, attract partnership that helps them feel safe and grounded and more alive. Because we're in a crisis where there's not a lot of healthy, happy relationships and not a lot of families coming together. There's a lot happening in the world that's sort of tearing apart that family system. And I'm here to really help people come together and heal themselves first, so they can attract greatness into their lives.
Wow, how powerful is that? Really, really powerful. This was such a great conversation. If you guys have made it this far, I'm curious, what did you connect with the most that Kristen talked about? Was it the near-death experience? Was it all of her ancestral things? Or was it more that when she started to talk about the soul retrieval and the spiritual aspects of love? I'm super curious about that. So I'd love to hear from you guys. But Kristen, I want to thank you. Thank you so much for what you are doing to wake up the collective. It is so needed right now.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for your work of helping to wake others up. And for everybody who's here and who's listened, you are here on purpose, and there's something really special that you uniquely bring to the world. So I can't wait to see what that is for each and every one of you.
Oh, I love that so much. Well, as always, thank you, everybody. This show is nothing without all of you who tune in to watch, to listen, and to share these beautiful experiences with somebody who needs to hear them. So if you still have questions, you can join me for Wake Up Wednesdays live at 5 p.m. Pacific, 6 p.m. Mountain, 7 p.m. Central, and 8 p.m. Eastern. Thank you, everybody, for watching. This channel's for seekers, for hearts who remember there's something more. Subscribe to join the awakening.